Broadcasting to all 50 states and more than 160 countries around the world, no matter what your clock says, it is prime time somewhere where people just like you share their inspirational and inspiring stories. Let's meet today's guest. And I would like to welcome in my guest today, and her name is Miss Avigail Gimpel. I hope I got that close enough. Welcome to the show today.
That was fantastic. Thank you. It's nice to be here with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to this.
No one gets it right.
Well, you know, I told you before we got started that I'm very interested in this subject because it's near and dear to my heart, as I do have a 10-year-old grandchild that has the ADHD that we're going to be discussing today. And that's something that I think there's a lot of people all across the world that experience that. And by the way, she is in the state of Israel. And I use the word state, but of course we know it is the nation of Israel. But now, I always start these exactly the same way. You're not going to be an exception. And that is just, who are you?
That's a great question. So, my name is Avigail, and that is a Hebrew name. It is one of the wives of King David, for those of you who are interested in Old Testament. And I'm a mom of 6 wonderful children, originally a New Yorker. I've been living in Israel for many, many years. And I myself am one of 8 children, and I'm a special education teacher and an author. I'm just publishing my 2nd book called HyperHealing, Show Me the Science, coming right up at the end of October. And who am I would be a person who's very, very passionate about helping children, about helping people in general get past diagnoses that they've been handed and really find the right way for them. Because when I see a person, I see a healthy person, and I see a clash between that person and their environment. And I'm kind of like a detective, and I try to figure out what it is that's clashing and therefore help that person get on the right path. And I've been at this for a lot of years as a classroom teacher, starting out very young in New York as a 20-year-old, then moving into Israel. And then we actually lived in Moscow for a couple of years. So I'm a Russian speaker as well. Isn't that wild? So I taught in Russian schools, and I saw these ADHD symptoms across the board in New York, in Moscow, and in Jerusalem. And the kids were showing the same presentation, but I was always curious to know what was causing these symptoms in each individual child, instead of bulking them all together and saying, oh, this is a diagnosis and this is our solution to that diagnosis. So that's a little bit about who I am.
Well, you know, one thing, when I was growing up, you know, I went to school in the 60s and in the 70s, and ADHD wasn't really a thing. I mean, I'm not saying that it didn't exist. I'm saying that people didn't know it existed. So, you know, we called it hyperactivity, and I think parents punish their children a lot. The schools punish the kids a lot because of the fact that they had this hyperactivity. Not, you know, it wasn't ADHD. So now you've been in this. I believe I saw where you have been involved with this for about 25 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So tell me, first of all, why did you get into it? I am gonna put your book cover up here for everybody to see, but the people that are watching this in visual form anyway. And I want to call attention very quickly. It's called HyperHealing, the Empowered Parent's Complete Guide to Raising a Healthy Child with ADHD Symptoms. How did you get into this stuff? What prompted you to get into it in the first place?
So I started as a classroom teacher, uh, and what I was seeing is that a lot of my students, this was at the mid to late 90s, and Ritalin was already considered the first line of treatment. And I was seeing my students taking, but they only had the two dose kind. They didn't have long acting yet. So my students would have to go at lunchtime to get their second dose from the nurse's office. And what I was seeing is that they were very different after they took their second dose. And I was bothered by that. I was bothered by the fact that it seemed like the spark in their personality was being obliterated by the medication in the afternoon. And I asked the parents to please maybe only allow the kids to have their first dose, and then I would handle them in the afternoon without that second dose, because I taught them in the afternoon and they had a rabbi teaching them in the morning. And what I found was that when I actually just saw and met these children as they were, each one of them had a very unique story. And the symptoms that we were seeing that we were calling ADHD were coming from so many different causes. And when their symptoms were masked, we weren't looking at them. We weren't curious. We weren't trying to find out what was going on for them. We were just breathing a sigh of relief. And if you ask your wife, who is dealing with your wonderful 10-year-old grandson, it's exhausting to raise a child with ADHD, and it's exhausting to educate a child with ADHD symptoms. And therefore, this medication thing was seeming to me to be much more for the teacher and the decorum in the classroom than it was for each individual child, because I was not seeing the children do better on the medication. I was seeing them be quieter, and I was seeing them be a little bit more robotic. But were they getting ahead? Were they learning more? Were their grades going up? That wasn't what I saw overall. And when I finally did get to meet the kids without the medication, I created a program for them, an intervention program for them within the classroom. And the kids started to do great because we started targeting the root causes of their ADHD symptoms, and we were finally starting to make progress. So God has a very funny sense of humor. And that same year that I was working with these amazing students who I really grew to love so much, all boys, and I met my husband that year. And I think I found him extremely charming because he was probably very similar in nature to these very energetic kids. And my husband is 100% would have been diagnosed with ADHD had they been diagnosing when he was younger. And he was so hyper when he was a little kid, he had to trace his shoes on the floor of his classroom to remind himself where to put his feet. And of course, some of these ADHD symptoms are caused by more of a genetic disposition. Now, it's not a genetic disorder, and that's a mistake people make. They think that since it's genetic, it's within families, therefore the parents are disordered and the children are disordered. But what it is a healthy personality type called an instant gratification personality. So these kids who are healthy and have this personality type of wanting everything here and now and interesting and fun and dangerous. And you told me about that little spill you took going down a hill. I'd love it if you shared that with us.
Well, yeah, when I was, I'll do that. When I was young, I was probably 4 or 5 years old because the Kennedy assassination took place in 1963. I'm really dating myself right now. Anyway, the Kennedy assassination took place in 1963, and we were in a different house when that happened from the house where this incident occurred, which was I went out and got in a wagon, and somebody was pulling me with a bicycle down a sloping street that actually ran into a busier street. And when they made the corner, I didn't, and the wagon flipped over. And my mom came running down the street wondering if her child was dead. It didn't even hurt me. I don't even remember any issues from it. But anyway, I did want to go back here for just a second because I also had a daughter that had ADHD along with many other things. She had bipolar disorder. They later in life diagnosed her with schizophrenia and all kinds of different things. And so I heard you talk about genetics a little bit, and of course,
right. So I was starting to talk about my children with genetics.
Yeah, that child, is the grandson I have now is the mother. Okay, so we
I understand.
always,
that's why. Okay.
yeah, we always associated the two. And you're saying that we really shouldn't associate the two? Am I hearing that correctly?
I'm saying that according to my research, it's not necessarily appropriate to associate the two. And I'll actually give you an interesting example. Just because, well, first of all, I'll finish saying what God's sense of humor is, because I had already been working with ADHD. Then I marry this amazing guy who's got more energy than anybody I've ever met on the planet, to the point where if I'm tired at 11:30 at night, he's still going, and I've been up since 6 a.m, and he's still running through the, and he looks at me and he says, why are you tired? I say, I've been up since 6 and it's 11:30. I've been working all day. And he says, maybe you need to check your iron. Like, it never occurs to him that people can be tired. So I have 6 children, and most of my 6 children were diagnosed with ADHD. The reason why not all of them were diagnosed with ADHD is because I stopped checking at some point. I was like, okay, I got it. I understand you guys. And, but going back to your question, this is just a quick example, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but I found it fascinating. So we have this issue called MTHFR, which is a genetic condition which causes, it can cause miscarriages, cause clotting, things like that. But the other thing it causes, so it's genetic, meaning that you have to get the gene from your mother and your father in order to have this condition called MTHFR. If you have the condition, you also don't synthesize the whole B vitamin group. Now, if you have that, that means that you are not getting ever adequate vitamin B. If you don't get adequate vitamin B, it's going to present itself as ADHD symptoms, as bipolar symptoms, as schizophrenia symptoms. It's just going to keep going, because the less vitamin B your body has, the more you're going to look like you're psychotic or having some kind of episode or other thing. So very often when you think that there's this genetic psychiatric condition, what you're really looking at is a genetic MTHFR condition. And then you start treating it as though this kid is doomed to have some kind of psychiatric condition. And therefore you get confused and you never take a deep look at the physiological condition. And this is something I bumped into just yesterday, once again, with a kid who came to me who was really, her behavior just keeps getting worse and worse. And the more medication they put this child on, the worse she gets, because her body's not able to synthesize that and deal with that. And she's got MTHFR. And the only proper treatment then is to give her the methyl B and the methylfolate. And that really takes care of the problem. And then, and it has nothing to do with psychiatry at all. And that's one example. But also, if we're looking at something else that's genetic, there's genetic personality types. So, and a personality type is never problematic, because it is the personality type that God gave that person. So it's a healthy personality type. The question is what that personality type does when it meets with its environment. And that's another thing that we always have to be looking at.
Wow. Okay. Well, now you already got my attention here, because my grandson, well, I'll start with my daughter first. Okay. Now, this is, I don't know if you're familiar with Obamacare, but
I a little bit. I try to avoid it as much as possible.
Well, prior to that is when Lindsay had her issues. And the only reason that I bring this up is because back then there was a cap on insurance, okay? So for mental health. So we actually topped out. We gave her all the medication that the doctors told us to give her, We put her in a special school where she was beginning to show some signs of maybe improvement or whatever. And then we topped out our insurance. We couldn't pay for it. It was too expensive. And the only thing that we had left was the medication, and they kept changing the medication. They said, you got to adjust this, and you got to adjust that, and you got to adjust this other thing. And it never panned out, never helped. And now with our grandson, we're in that same situation of the doctors trying to find the right brew or whatever you want to call it, to do things. And you're saying that there's a possibility that there's something completely different, another way to treat this, and that's got my interest. So I'd like for you to speak to that just a little bit more. And I think you've given the letters for it. Can you detail it out just a little bit? Because like I said, I'm really interested in this particular topic.
Right, sure. So MTHFR was just one example, and that's genetic, and you need a gene from both parents in order to have that. But I wanted to address two things you said. You were talking about this magic brew that the doctors keep trying to find both for your daughter and for your grandson. And here's the problem. My second book, which is coming out at the end of October, is called HyperHealing, Show Me the Science. And I really went through all the science on the medication. And it turns out that the medication itself very often exacerbates and causes more psychiatric conditions. As a matter of fact, 1 in 10 kids that are on ADHD medication are going to land up developing another psychiatric condition. Now, people get very mad at me when I say that, because they say, well, you're judging parents, and parents don't have a choice. They have to put their kids on medication for the school. Fair enough. I'm not judging any parents, because I myself am a parent, and I've had to put 3 of my children on medication at different times in their schooling, because the school was just like, we're not educating this kid the way she or he is. And there's a lot of pressure, and they're saying terrible messages like you're destroying your child's life, and if you don't medicate them, they're going to land up with XYZ condition. But it's actually the actual truth is the exact opposite. And very often, and I within my career have worked with psychiatrists with clients that have come to me that were on multiple medications, and my first goal was to bring them down from the medication while changing their diet and doing a very, very intense physiological check to see if there's something else going on, sending my clients for blood tests and really listening hard. So I'll give you a couple of examples of physiological symptoms that could be causing all of these ADHD, bipolar symptoms, ADHD symptoms. So we can start with something very simple like a gut dysbiosis. So a kid who was born by C-section, or a kid who's been put on antibiotics many, many times in their childhood, who had some kind of surgery in childhood, that child is going to have a leaky gut and an imbalanced gut. An imbalanced gut, we call the gut our second brain. And if the gut is imbalanced, it's going to cause our first brain, which is our actual brain, to not work correctly. And not only that, our gut produces the neurotransmitters that our brain needs in order to function. So when you're talking about bipolar, the question is, did they check what's going on in the gut? Because if the gut's not working well, it's not going to send those neurotransmitters we need to the brain to keep the brain balanced. So that's one example. And I spend a long time in my book talking about the proper nourishing diet to help get people back on track, because diet is so essential to helping someone with ADHD symptoms. Now, not all people have an imbalanced gut. So that is going to be the cause for some people, and certainly for some of my children, that was the cause, because we discovered later on that they had celiac, and kids that have celiac or Crohn's or other kinds of autoimmune conditions must be put on a very, very strict diet to help with the autoimmune conditions. Once the autoimmune condition, which includes asthma and allergies, which many children have today. So if you put them on that diet and bring down those symptoms and bring down the inflammation, the behavior works itself out as well. But we also have sleep disorders, kids that do not fall asleep properly or wake up during the night. So the parents will say, my kid hasn't slept a full night in their entire life, and the kid is 7 years old already. What's going to happen to a kid who hasn't slept in a long time? They're going to develop not only ADHD symptoms, but very often they're going to develop what presents as psychosis. And then we're going to land up putting that child on all sorts of drugs. And in the case of ADHD, you're putting the kid on stimulants, which keeps them up longer. So now you're exacerbating a problem that already exists. So putting a child on stimulants or an adult on stimulants without checking if they're sleeping well is a terrible crime against that child. And if we're looking at the environment, we're also looking at kids. Many children who've been diagnosed with ADHD are also dealing with trauma or abuse. Another area that we never want to medicate, because if this child's dealing with trauma or abuse, what we're doing is shutting them up and not allowing them to scream and yell and say, something's wrong in my life. So that's just a taste of the things we really have to be looking at.
Okay, and now you've again sparked my interest here because my grandson has issues, excuse me, with his stomach. Okay, and I don't think that anybody has ever even mentioned that. Now they have given him a special diet to do. I'm going to go back to one of the first things that you said. You said something about, I believe, vitamin D. Was that right? Because to my knowledge, vitamin B. Okay.
Yeah.
Is
and
that
folic acid, all that.
is that an effective, or is that something that we as parents, or in my case as grandparents, should look at as something to add to what's going on here, and then should we begin to wean him off of the medications? I mean, back in Lindsay's day, when she would take this medicine, she became a zombie. You know, I mean, I really felt sorry for her. I'm not seeing that with my grandson. I'm not seeing that, but I am seeing
they're putting him on a different class of medication, probably.
Yeah, he wakes up in the morning and we talk about chaos in the house. I mean, it's instant in the morning. He takes his medication and he's better all through the school day. And then as soon as he gets home, here comes the chaos again. So, you know, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm just being honest with you. I'm really curious about this stuff. And I'm trying to figure out how I can equate it to my life and make my life better and his life better.
Let's go with your grandson. Let's do an on-air analysis of what's going on with your grandson. If I was doing an intake with you and you were telling me all about your grandson, I would ask you a lot of questions about his physical state. I would ask you things like, first of all, how does he sleep? Does he sleep through the night? I would ask you if he's constipated, which is a big deal because that's going to point toward a gut issue, and that's also going to be something that I would add magnesium for to help with the constipation. I would
is that milk of magnesia? Is that milk of magnesia?
You can use. Sure, you can use milk of magnesia as well. Usually, I would go with a magnesium citrate, but milk of magnesia is also great. And I give the exact amounts in my book so that parents, if they want to do that, they can do that. So what we're going to give magnesium for is if we see any symptoms of constipation, which is going to cause the body to be inflamed because all the toxins that are trying to leave your body start to recirculate when you have when you're constipated. So the magnesium gets that all out of your body. Usually sleep and constipation go together. So if I see either one of those, I want to treat both of them together with magnesium. It's very hard to overdose on magnesium. It's much easier to overdose on any of the psychiatric meds than it is from magnesium. So it's a fairly safe one. It's water soluble. It gets right out of your system as soon as it doesn't build up in your system. So
okay.
that's
let me
something
break
that I would
in for a second because. He doesn't have constipation. What he does have is a medical condition in which he doesn't realize when he needs to go to the bathroom.
Incontinence, like an incontinence.
Bad, real bad. This is to the point where it became an issue in the schools, which has caused him to have to go back into pull-ups at age 10. And you can imagine what that does as far as his confidence level and the way that he is able to act in school. So I'm wondering if that condition plays into the same thing, or if that is a different area.
I would not necessarily equate them. What I would look at is what's going on for him with his gut. Does he have a lot of gas and bloating? Does he have a lot of stomach aches? Does he have any autoimmune conditions? Any other symptoms? Does he get rashes on his skin? Does he have asthma or allergies? What, like, his overall health condition? Was he sick as a child? Did he cry a lot as a child? Is he sensitive to certain foods or materials? That would be the next place I would go. So why don't you go ahead and tell me about that? And I remember sitting in the classroom, and I see myself today. I'm able to sit and write a 400-page book. I do not have any ADHD symptoms. I was actually selected as valedictorian in graduate school. It took that long to find my footing, but I finally got there. But I remember sitting in class. I never did my homework, never did my schoolwork. And the teacher hung a chart in the classroom just to get us to brush our teeth, like a simple brush teeth chart. And every day I'd come in, I'd be like, why can't I get this done? What is wrong with me that I can't? And I was way too honest to lie and say I brush my teeth, because that's just part of the nature sometimes. And so I was never managing to succeed. And when I think back on it, and maybe that's why I have such a soft spot for kids with ADHD symptoms, is that I displayed all the ADHD symptoms, and it had nothing to do with anything chemical in my brain, and it had nothing to do with genetics. It had to do with a really rough environment that I was trying to navigate. And there is no way for a child whose brain is completely stuffed with trauma, with where do I belong, who do I belong to, who am I, really going to major existential issues, to be able to focus in class and to be able to do their schoolwork, keep themselves organized, behave well. It's not possible. The medication just makes it worse. I think to myself, had I been medicated back then, all that would have happened was kicking the problem down the road and landing up in severe post-trauma. Post-trauma, as we know, looks like a lot of psychiatric conditions. So I'm the lucky one that they weren't medicating when I was a little kid. But right now, what we're doing to children who are in trauma by medicating them is awful. And as a matter of fact, I actually was going to ask you about that, because when you talked about the incontinence, it doesn't have to do with something physiological, it seems to me. That, to me, would point toward trauma. That was my next question to you.
Okay.
Which I wasn't going to ask because that's so personal.
Well, like I said, I'm real interested in the topic. I mean, we want to provide him with the very best home that we possibly can. The thing is that when he's in school and he's on the medication that has been prescribed for him, he does focus, and he's like a straight A student at school. Teachers call us and they write us and they say, "Oh, it's such a joy to have this child in our class." And we're saying, "Is this the same kid? Or you've got to be messing us up, right?" Because what we have is utter 100% chaos. When he's here, he cannot concentrate on anything unless it's electronic. Like if it's a game or something like that, then he's in it 100%. He's in a TV 100%. Whatever that is. But as far as being able to just function and use what I call good common sense, as a matter of fact, I used to make a joke about it. When this is between me and my wife, I said, when God said common sense, he thought he meant picket fence, so he didn't participate. It's really that, it's that stark. It really is. And from what you're telling me is, even though we're going through this at home without the medication, that we should stay away from it and move on to something else, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, I'll tell you what. First of all, let's talk about what you're experiencing at home and what they're experiencing in school. We know that all of the ADHD medications are highly addictive. They have a black box warning on them. That means that your body is craving them, even though many kids do not want the medication. And a lot of adults will say to me, "You're crazy. It can't possibly be addictive because I always forget to take it." One has nothing to do with the other. Your body craves it because it starts messing with the chemicals in your brain. It causes an imbalance in your brain and the dopamine system and most of the classes of medication, also norepinephrine. And since it causes this imbalance, your body suddenly, once the medication leaves the body, that's that rebound that you're experiencing when he comes home from school, is the body desperate for another hit of medication. And therefore, what you're seeing is a little addict who needs more medication. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, so I remember seeing addicts just wandering the streets. And this was back in New York. It's in Far Rockaway, if anybody knows where that is. Back in the day, Far Rockaway was quite the rough place. And when I see kids, especially my own kids, coming down from this addictive fix that they just had with their pill, they act like those addicts because they are addicted to the medication and their brain is desperate for another hit. Not only that, overall, even though the medication leaves the body after 8, 10, 12 hours, depending on what medication, what pill the child's taking, since it's made a shift in your brain, if you stop the medication, it takes about between 3 and 4 weeks for your brain to go back to its previous functioning. So what you're seeing when your grandson wakes up in the morning is a child whose brain has been slightly altered, and therefore he does not know how to behave well. It's like a little bit of a craziness going on in his brain. So you're getting none of the joy, and then he goes off to school with this pill. The pill works. It works for everybody, which is why what I'm saying is a hard sell. Because what I'm saying is we have to open up everything. We have to look at the entire picture, and we have to figure out what's going on with your child or your grandchild. And what I'm saying is you've got to work even harder than you're working. Now, you say that to a parent or grandparent who's raising a child with ADHD symptoms, and they say, there's no way you're going to get me to do that. I'm already over my head. But the truth is that once we do a proper investigation and we get to those root causes, then the child does calm down, and though that calm lasts a long time. The calm that a child gets on medication is more like a sledgehammer. You just kind of smack the kid over the head, and they hyper focus on whatever it is that they're learning, and they can do well in school, which is why people like to use the medication, and which is why it's an absolute bestseller, because people want to get that quick fix for their child, and they feel like they're doing the best thing for their child. Short term, it's fantastic. Long term, we have no studies showing that kids who have taken medication for more than 3 years are in better condition than their peers who are also diagnosed with ADHD who did not take medication for the same 3 years. So if you're using it for short term, no problem. If you rely on that to help your child or grandchild do well, that's when you get into the major problems.
Okay, so now I'm perfectly fine with taking him off the medication and enduring 3 or 4 weeks of utter chaos if that leads me to where we want to be, which is getting him to where he just acts normal, And
right.
It's really tough because his younger brother has no symptoms, none at all. He didn't. Did
his younger brother endure the same kind of abuse?
No, he did not. Now, he insists that he did, but if he did, he sure doesn't remember it. So we've got one that's normal, and he's 9 years old, and then we got one that's got this thing, and he's far from it. And I'm trying to figure out what I, as a grandparent, should do? Take him off of it. I mean, is this like cold turkey type thing, or
No, never.
okay?
Never.
Kind of explain how that should work out.
So we never pull a kid, especially if they've been on ADHD medication or any psychiatric medication. This is really important for anyone to know. Taking a person off of these this class of medications is painstaking, and you got to do it carefully, because people can really land up in a very, very bad situation. So therefore, we would lower the dose slowly. We would go down by dose, maybe doing 2 weeks of every dose that we're lowering until we get to the lowest dose. And then at that point, you can take the child off of it. For other psychiatric medications, it has to be done with a trained professional. This is not something you do at home, which is why even when I help clients get off of medication, I always do it with a doctor, and I'm there for support. But the thing is, if you're going to do that, you have to have a lot of things in place first. First of all, you want to make sure that the diet is really in good shape. You mentioned that he was on a diet, and I'd be curious to hear what diet he's on. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is you'd have to get him into intensive therapy. I actually really, really like the somatic therapies like EMDR or EFT, because especially for a 10-year-old, talk therapy is really difficult. You can do play therapy, which or drama therapy. Those are nice, but I find that really getting to the root of trauma, which is something that must be done right now. A child who's been through that kind of abuse really, really has to have a strong safety net to fall back to as you're reducing medication. So those kind of therapies are very good. And I also recommend that you and your wife also learn a therapeutic approach, which is also something that I include in a full chapter there, because we as parents can or caregivers can do a lot to support this process at home with the way you're disciplining, with the dialogue you're having with him. It's really starting from scratch. He needs a tremendous amount of love, sympathy, empathy, and care, and also a lot of very, very nourishing kind of discipline. So
Okay.
I would not.
Well, let me ask you this. Again, he's on all kinds of medicine. He's got his morning stuff he takes, and he's got stuff to help him sleep at night. But there's no medication that, where he doesn't wake up and cause utter chaos right away. And then when he comes home from school, he's still sort of on it, but he's beginning to get off of it. So the first few minutes he's okay, and then after that, here comes the chaos for the evening. And he does the same things over and over again, expecting a different result. Okay, I mean, that's the
Sure.
only way I can describe it. Let me ask you: Are doctors with you on this, or are you finding resistance from the psychiatric community? Because they're all about medicate, and me, I didn't grow up in the medicate era. I mean, as I told you, they just used to call it hyperactivity. So I'm just wondering, are you getting a fight? Are you getting any kind of resistance from the medical community on this stuff?
So far not, and I've actually had interviews with medical doctors, with pediatricians, and they all say the same thing. If only we could do what you're doing. We can't. We have 15 minutes with a patient, and the parents come in and they expect us to fix it. So we fix it in the only way we know how. And since my approach is multidisciplinary, they don't have the time to study exercise and diet and also psychological treatments, and also looking to see if the child has any screen addictions. They just don't have the bandwidth to do that. So they're saying, great, you go, girl. But this is not something that we can do, nor do we know that this actually produces the results. We know the medication works. We know that this is what we've been taught, and we're going to go with it. But so far, not. I think when my second book comes out, I will probably start getting some pushback, because then I really pull open all the studies. And I think that that is going to cause a little bit of defensiveness. And if doctors are just wanting to protect their profession instead of looking at what could really help their patients, they are going to push back at me. And I'm almost sort of ready for that. We'll see what happens with it.
Well, now you just said second book, so I want to put this one up on screen and see. Now, is this your first or your second book that I'm showing right there? And if the, well, I guess just give me the title of both of them, and so then tell me.
This is the first book.
Okay, so HyperHealing is your first book.
Yeah, and it's a series. I wrote them together, and I just edited the second one afterwards. But the process was that the way I really got into the subject of ADHD was out of this tremendous curiosity. I wanted to understand why doctors were telling me that what I perceived as my perfectly healthy oldest child was disordered, and there was something wrong with her brain. And I'm kind of looking at her and I'm saying, that doesn't appear to me to be the case, but the doctor is saying it, so it must be true. And but something wasn't sitting right for me, so I really took a deep dive into the whole story of the history of ADHD. And the truth is, we only see ADHD as a diagnosis in 1980. Before that, they called it a hyperkinetic. Oh goodness, I can't remember the rest of it. Something about hyperkinetic. And but basically, I wanted to understand how we got to this diagnosis, and who was pushing for the diagnosis, and who was pushing for medication being the first line of treatment. So that was because that also didn't make sense to me, because I'm looking at it, I'm saying, okay, if a kid has severe allergies and has a runny nose all the time, don't we want to look at that too? And doctors are not looking at that. So why aren't they looking at that? And then when I get into the studies, I understand that there was pharma was really pushing for the medical model, even though we still don't have proof that there's anything wrong with these kids' brains. And they're pushing for the medical model, obviously, because ADHD is incredibly profitable. And if ADHD causes another psychiatric condition in 1 in 10 kids, you have a patient for life. So we were seeing, I was starting to look into functional medicine and other different treatment plans, and I'm seeing, my God, this stuff works. No one's talking about it because it's being buried by the people who are making the profit. And not only that, a lot of the information we're getting, especially teacher training, is coming from pharma companies that are masquerading as educational websites and things like that.
Right. So now, again, I told you before we even started, this subject is something that is near and dear to my heart. And you sound to be like the first expert that we've taken to all doctors, trust me. I mean, I think I told you, he's been to more doctors in his 10 years than I've been in my 64. And, you know, it's like one doctor's got one plan, another doctor's got another plan. And as far as I'm concerned, nobody has a plan, at least nothing that works. And you seem to have something here that might just work. So, you know, count on a sale today, you're getting one. But this first book now, it is already out there. It's already on the market. Is the other one also getting nearer to it? And also, I want you to give your website address and how people might contact you if you allow that, how people can contact you as well.
With pleasure. Actually, this book just this week hit #1 bestseller on Amazon, the ebook. So that was really exciting.
Wow.
So this book, the one you keep showing on screen, and I so appreciate it. I love that picture too, because it reminds me of my son. I know it reminded you of yourself, but that one of my sons, very much. I look at the picture and I imagine him racing down the hill on it, because he's done that many times. But that first book that you're showing is the full treatment plan. That means a parent could open up that book, figure out what's going on for their child and follow the very step-by-step program, and they can enjoy that. The second, and really see a lot of incredible results, like I've seen with my own child, with my own children. There's nothing in that book that I haven't tried myself. I'm not an ivory tower person. I am a boots on the ground person, and I've tried all of it. My kids often suggest that maybe they are my lab rats, which there's some truth to what they're saying. And the second book, which is going to be available at the end of October, and I'll send you a copy of that book with pleasure, and I'll also send you the cover of that. So that one is the whole conversation about the history of ADHD, the medication, what the side effects of the medication are, what the studies say about the brain of a kid diagnosed with ADHD. It's a fascinating essay, and it's a much shorter book because it's not the whole treatment plan. Some parents really want to know what's going on behind the scenes, like I did, and some people just want to be handed the plan. Just give me the plan and stop talking so much. That's why I separated the books. And what I highly recommend for parents to do is, if you have friends or colleagues that are also dealing with the same ADHD issues, I really recommend using that first book of HyperHealing to make a church group or a synagogue group, a community center group, where you meet once a week and each of you at home reads a chapter, and then you come together to give support and also to go through the action plan that I provide at the end of every chapter. So it's actually been created to be used as a textbook for group settings. If you can't pull that off, or if you just want to visit my website anyway, I'm always happy to see you and to meet you there. That's hyperhealing.org. I just put up a quiz on the website where you can get a basic idea of what's causing yours or your child's ADHD symptoms. So if you were to go there right now and take the quiz, you're going to find out pretty quickly that a lot of everything's pointing toward trauma and abuse in his case. The symptoms you're going to see are going to come up very clearly to trauma and abuse. And then I offer a free chapter of the book where you can actually read what you can do to help your grandchild with that.
Wow.
So,
okay. Yeah, I mean, that sounds... Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's fine. People can reach out to me through my website and send me. You could subscribe and get tons of free information. I'm always putting out videos and all sorts of free information, as well as reach directly out to me, and we can set up a meeting together. I have a free 15-minute meeting where I can listen to your story and try to give you the right kind of direction for you. That's how passionate I am. I want every child to be able to do well, and I also want every parent not to feel like they can't get the very, very best care because they don't have enough money to pay for it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you right now that I'm going to tell Anita to take one of those 15-minute sessions with you.
Sure.
Like I said, we try everything. We only want the best for this kid, okay? And the problem is that no matter what we try, we're not seeing enough result to believe in the current treatment. And we go from one doctor to another, and this doctor corrects what the other one did and changes it up, and it's maddening. It's just simply maddening is the only way to describe it. But now, I'm also going to take that quiz, and I'm going to have Anita take that quiz as well. I saw it on your website. I have visited your website, and I did see that, and I'm going to have both of us take it. Again, I do want to put the book cover back up there one more time. HyperHealing, the Empowered Parent's Complete Guide to Raising a Healthy Child with ADHD Symptoms. And I can tell you that there's a lot of these kids. I mean, I know he's not the only one. And parents are frustrated because they do go the psychiatric route. I mean, you try everything first, right? You try to calm them down the way that you would a kid that does not have this. and it doesn't work. It just simply doesn't work. And so then you turn to doctors, and then the doctors are giving you all these different medicines, and they're telling you, well, we got to try this one, and if it doesn't work, then we'll try this one, and if that doesn't work, then we'll try this one, and if that doesn't work, then we'll send you to a specialist where he can try something else. I'm tired of trying. Please understand. I don't mean that I'm ready to give up on it. I'm not. I'm saying I'm tired of the guesswork. And this right here seems to be at least an avenue to explore something different. And if I can get him off of medication, that's great. I'm not a big fan of over medication. And if I can receive results without a lot of medication, then that's the route I want to go, and that seems like where you're going. So I want to give you a chance here to just go in anything that I've missed in this. I want you to speak directly to those out there that are in desperate need of your services like we are, and be sure and give us again the name of the website and all that, to where people can take advantage of all the resources that you do offer.
Okay, sure. So first of all, the website is hyperhealing.org. You can go ahead and take that quiz, and you can reach out to me directly, ask me your questions, disagree with what I've said, or whatever it is you want. I'm always here for you. I'm a teacher. I love the dialogue, and I love also to hear anything you have to add. And what's most important to me is that your child do better. I meet with couple after couple and parents all the time who are really suffering, and they're getting so much bad advice. And my first advice to every parent is that you take a deep breath, and you say that you look at that child and you say, this child is a healthy child. You start there. And then you say, what is going on for my child? And that's when you get into the investigation mode. So sometimes it's as simple as a child has a food allergy, and we would hope it were that simple for all children. And in some cases, I'm able to help a parent just take care of that problem with a change in diet or getting rid of a certain food group. But in most cases, it's a little more complex than that, especially since, let's say a child has a instant gratification personality. Well, that child's been living with that personality for quite some time, and therefore has gotten so much negative feedback from his or her environment. So they've developed all sorts of low self-esteem and stress and trauma piled on top of it. So we have to look at both. But what I really, really beg you to do is return your faith to your child and stop looking outside and running desperately for this pill or that pill. Your child's brain is growing, and we're tinkering with that beautiful growing brain with all sorts of chemicals. Now, I'm not saying not to medicate. As you heard earlier in the show, I actually have medicated my own children for certain amounts of time. And it was not a blessing for us, but for some people, it is amazingly helpful. And when a child is in terrible trauma, sometimes they need a little bit of help just so that they can restore faith in themselves, that they can do well in school, that they can get along with people, that they can make a friend or two. So it is a tool in the toolkit, but it is by far not the only tool. And I would even say it should probably be the last tool that you use. Go and look, investigate diet, investigate trauma, investigate, is this child addicted to screens? Screen addiction causes ADHD symptoms.
100%.
And not the other way around.
100%. I agree with that statement, because he is addicted to electronics. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any more time today, but let me tell you this. As I said, I'm going to go get it. Anybody out there that has an ADHD child, I can promise you, if you haven't been down the full road yet, you're going to go down the same road that I did. And, it becomes really frustrating when you hear a bunch of different people tell you a bunch of different things. And I have learned so much in the past hour that it is incredible. So I'm going to highly recommend for people to go out And here's the first book, HyperHealing, The Empowered Parent's Complete Guide to Raising a Healthy Child with ADHD Symptoms. And I know that you've got a second coming out, and I do want people also to go to the HyperHealing website. Is that hyperhealing.org.com? And then
and both books are available there as well. And the second one is HyperHealing, Show Me the Science, which it has its big debut on the 18th of October.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been enlightening and it's been educational. And I really appreciate your time today. And after we end, I'm going straight to the website. So thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for coming on today. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for joining us tonight for another edition of It's Prime Time Somewhere. If you happen to have an interesting, an informative, an educational or inspirational story that you would like to share, please join us by writing office@ustreamit.net. That's office@ustreamit.net, and we will help you share your story across the world to all 50 states and more than 160 countries around the globe. Until next time, be sure and join us every Monday and Friday evening at 9 p.m. Central Time for another edition of It's Prime Time Somewhere.